Welcome, broadcasting to the entirety of the Super Smash Bros. Community. This is Beyond the Metagame. I'm your host, Peon, this week live from the South Pole. I'm joined, as always, by my wonderful co-host, Abhi. Abhi, how you doing, big guy?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. We got some Europeans here for some reason. Why are they here?
There's a lot of people here, man. This is the only continent that BTM has never reached. So I'm glad that we're making a physical appearance.
Right. I mean, have you heard that new like penguins meme about Europeans being penguins?
Yeah, we just saw Leffen right before this. It was great.
Yeah.
No one here at Antarctica is seated like top 50 at Genesis. It's a real shame.
Yeah, it is a real shame. I mean, Gluttony is the name of an emperor penguin. Has a really sick Yoshi actually.
But dude, man, welcome guys. This week, we have a really big one today. This, I think, Abhi and I have just been talking. It might be our favorite episode that we've ever recorded yet. Our guest, Sports Psychologist Steve, is just such an awesome guy. The dude knows so much, and he's really like the professional manifestation of everything that Abhi and I wanted to accomplish on Beyond the Metagame. And it's awesome to kind of be validated in some of the things that Abhi and I hold dearly and hear it from the mouth of a professional. Like, what do you think, Abhi?
Yeah, I mean, we go over a lot of really cool things that kind of encompass a lot of the stuff that we've talked about on this show. We break down pretty much everything about introspection, as you guys know is easily one of my favorite topics. And I think we lay out a really nice path for people to follow, which is kind of usually the most important thing. And when people ask, like, how do I take stuff away from an episode? It's usually I follow this X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, man. And definitely make sure to stay tuned all the way throughout. We talk a lot about like the importance of psychology as it applies to esports and to gaming in general, but also at the very end he goes over some practical kind of implementations of and what the individual should start practicing, and it's just really consistently awesome throughout. And he has a lot of great little trinkets that I think are retrievable by the listeners like throughout the entire interview. So make sure to listen close, make sure to enjoy yourself as much as Abhi and I did. Abhi, any last words before the episode starts?
Yeah, I'm just kind of follow along with building the unbreakable mind. Listen to the stuff about pressure, setbacks, fueling the mind, and how to become a good leader. And then at the end, we go over really nicely what we should do in practice.
So guys, all that and more in just 1 second. Welcome back to Beyond the Metagame. This week, Abhi and I are joined by Sports Psychologist Steve. And I'm really excited to have Steve on the show today for all of you. Because Abhi and I, we do a lot of kind of backseat psychology, a lot of bro science, in quotation mark. But today we're joined by a real professional. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. And definitely appreciate you reaching out to me. And I'm looking forward to talking with you guys for the next hour or so.
So, Steve, this is what I want to know is you're a sports psychologist, as stated previously, and you're also a gamer. So, why psychology? Why should gamers care about it? And why would you, as a sports psychologist, make this like your life's mission?
Well, the sports psychology thing for me started, back in college when I went in undecided and had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and just took some psychology classes. And I really just appreciated like the science of psychology of just understanding like why things happen and like why people are the way that they are. And then, graduating with a bachelor's degree in psychology, you really can't do a whole lot with that. So I was just trying to figure out like what I wanted to do with my life. And I've always been like a big sports fan. And so I took the route of like, trying to marry the two fields of like, I like sports and athletics, and then I really like psychology. And there's this field of sports psychology where you apply the same foundations of psychology to performance, and specifically to sports and athletes. So getting my graduate degree in sports psychology and starting to work with athletes it really started around the same time that esports became a lot more popular. And I've always been a gamer like all my life. And I started to see that there was a potential to talk about the stuff that I was learning in my graduate training in sports psychology with another one of my passions, which was gaming. And over the last few years, all the conversations that I've had with people that have been interested in both of those things definitely agree that there is a lot of overlap between working with an athlete and working with an esport athlete when it comes to the psychology of the game.
Yeah, it's really interesting because a lot of people don't normally say, "Okay, I'm playing this video game competitively," even if they're like a mid-level or like becoming a pro player. They don't say, "Okay, now I have to focus on my psychology and I have to introspect and I have to understand like like all of these concepts that are probably very foreign to them." Why should gamers jump into it and care about this topic that, although as you've described, is not that far removed from it, but from a gamer's context, why should gamers jump into this to this avenue of science that they've probably never explored in their life?
Well, honestly, I think they already do. And that's the thing is like, even when, you guys were introducing, the interview, you're talking about like, we already discuss these things as gamers. Like we talk about, staying focused, or we talk about like not going on tilt, or we talk about like improvement. Those are all areas within the field of sports psychology. And so just becoming a little bit more familiar with like putting science and research and peer reviewed literature to the things that you already care about can just make you better at the things that you're already doing to try to improve in the game. And even if you're not trying to be like, the world's best or a competitive player, you probably still want to be good at the game. Like it's fun to be good at the game. And so these things can apply to those individuals who are maybe just learning, those that play, not necessarily competitively in like tournaments, but just like play to try to win and to have fun. And then also like those high level competitors who actually are competing in like the big tournaments for big prize money.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's actually like one really interesting divide between the medium of gaming compared to like sports or other performance situations, is that gaming is such a young industry. I mean, competitive gaming has only really been a thing in the last couple of decades, and that's pretty generous. So how do you see the implementation of sports psychology developing within kind of the esports world, and also within just like gamers' homes themselves, like people who are competitive minded when they're just playing games to relax?
Yeah, I think that's definitely two different areas, right? Because like the home consumer can listen to things like podcasts or read books or read blogs, like see Twitter, and they can pick up like techniques here and there. But like the esports side, where like you talk about organizations, you talk about pro players, that's probably going to take still a little bit more time. Even with like professional sports teams, not every professional sports team even has a sports psychologist on staff. And they have a lot more money to spend on these types of things, So like thinking that, like Counterlogic Gaming or like, any of the big esport organizations could have a sports psychologist on staff. It's starting to get there. Like there actually are some people that are working full time in the esports industry, providing mental game support, mental skills support. But it's going to take a little bit more time and a little bit more probably like awareness of the community to understand that there is this valuable resource that's out there, in the same way that that resource is available for things like the interview that you had with Dr. McGee, where she was talking a little bit more about like the physical therapy side and how that can impact, esports and, nutrition and just a lot of other performance areas that can impact these competitors that are, working and playing at the highest level. I think it's just going to take some time for that industry to incorporate that in the same way. It took some time for professional sports to do that. That's only happened within the last 20 or so years also.
Yeah, it's hard to think like Babe Ruth back in the day when he was on top of his game was like smoking cigars in the dugout and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like he definitely wasn't like changing his, attention deliberately and doing pre-performance routines. I mean, his pre-performance routine was probably taking a swig of whiskey or something, walking up to the plate, and then just hitting a home run. So like, it's definitely something where like, it comes back to money again. Like it's one of those things where athletes are assets, and if an owner wants to get the most out of those assets, then they want to make sure that they're performing at their best. So they're going to start focusing on all of those performance areas, to include things like the mental game, the physical therapy, the strength training, the nutrition, the sleep, and all of those other performance areas as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, Abhi, you go ahead. Sorry.
No. I think, but without trying to get too narrow at the beginning of this conversation, one last thing to kind of cap this discussion on the introduction into esports is you mentioned that there is this kind of like pickup period for esports and for original sports to kind of bring on sports psychologists, and there is this initial fixed cost.
Yeah.
One of the issues is that football, baseball, and tennis, like all of these things have been going on for hundreds of years. Esports, especially with the way that playing new video games work, like you could be playing one game, and then in 4 years or 3 years or even less, be playing a completely different game.
Right.
Do you think that this like this high turnover rate of video games will lead to the lower acquisition and involvement of people like dedicated sports psychologists?
I don't think so. I think where the field is heading is in the right direction in two ways. One of them is with the larger organizations supporting multiple titles. So, you have like Cloud9, where they're going to have like a Rocket League team, but they're also going to have like, a Fortnite team, and they're also going to have like a Call of Duty team. And so like the organization could support having a performance team that includes a sports psychologist that could work with all of their esport athletes across multiple different titles. So I think that helps with the longevity piece. Yeah. And then the other thing too is I'm really interested to see what happens with like the Overwatch League and like the League of Legends league as well, because having that kind of money invested into something that's going to sustain and stay for several years can lead to some longevity and some introduction into from like the performance team standpoint into preparing those esport competitors and athletes to, win the championship season after season,
Definitely.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like all the other kind of peripheral infrastructure around, let's say Overwatch League, LCS, those kind of things really sort of beg the question, like, hey, what else do we need to go alongside all this traditional competition? But Steve, you, and I'm quoting your Twitter directly, so this is straight from the horse's mouth.
Okay, I don't even know what's written on there, so let me know.
It's you say that you are a U.S. Army performance enhancement specialist, a sports fan and gamer. So your day job, I presume, is helping out military people with their sort of performance mindset. So if you would please tell us a little bit about that, but also, what advice that you could give them or training you could give them would also be applicable to other people, Smash Bros players in our instance, or athletes, like what is universal about our psychology and how does it all fit together?
Yeah, it's a good question. So sometimes it's hard to describe what I do because it's sort of like, I don't know. It becomes difficult to describe, but I'll do my best. So I help soldiers perform better. And when I say that, I don't provide like tactical advice. I don't have any military background. I'm not providing like strategies and stuff. I help them with the mental component of being a soldier. And so every soldier has a variety of different performances, whether it's like being a good marksman, if you're, an infantry guy. Maybe if you're a pilot, it's being able to fly properly. Maybe you're an engineer. So like there's a lot of different performances within being a soldier. And so a lot of the same foundational skills of sports psychology, like maintaining focus when there are distractions present, dealing with anxiety and fear when you're doing something new for the first time, or bringing confidence into a task where you are placed in an uncertain environment, staying motivated to train. All of these types of foundational skills of sports psychology would apply to each of the soldiers, in addition to things like being resilient and maintaining things like self-awareness and self-regulation strategies. So those are things that I do to try to help a soldier prepare for his performance or her performance, which is eventually, being deployed and being in a dangerous environment. Now, how that all applies to an athlete and an esport athlete, or a Smash Brothers player, it's all the same, right? In the sense that your performance is just a little bit different. So if I'm a baseball player and I have to hit a fastball, that's the performance. If I'm a Smash Brothers player, I need to win that particular game, right? And so I still have to do the same stuff. I still have to stay focused if there are distractions. I still have to deal with the things that I have control over and try to not focus on the things that I don't have control over. I still need to set goals for myself so that I maintain motivation over time. All of those same concepts that I would help a soldier with, or I would help an athlete with, would apply to an esport athlete, or specifically a Smash Brothers player.
Right. Like, either way, the job's got to get done. The job itself is less important than actually the process of getting it accomplished, right? Is that kind of...
Yeah, exactly. And it's not for people that are broken, right? Like, that's one of the fallacies of sports psychology, is like, oh, you got to go talk to the shrink because there's something wrong with you. But in reality, like, the sports psychology is there to help people get better at whatever level you're at. So if you're a beginner, it'll help you become better at the beginning game. If you're pretty good, it can help you get great. If you're one of the best in the world, oftentimes those individuals that get there, physically, they're usually about the same as their competitors. Tactically, they kind of understand the same strategies, but usually the mental game is the difference maker. And that's why you see sports psychologists that are on staff, like at the United States Olympic Committee, at the professional sports teams, working with special forces. Like, those guys are all the best of the best. And there's still that 1% difference between everybody might be the mental game. And so these guys aren't broken by any means. They're the best of the best, and they can still benefit from the same topics and skills that sports psychology provides,
Right. Yeah, it's pretty interesting because there's this kind of concept that's been floating around maybe for the last year or two, that if you control for any type of like original talent or income or background, you get pretty similar performance across a lot of different competitive avenues. But the one thing that seems to stand out is this thing called grit. It's often very like vaguely and arbitrarily defined, but the one thing that kind of brings it together is like, can you keep going? Can you persevere through non-optimal situations, through environmental changes, through psychological and sociological like turbulence in your life? And that kind of brings me to one of the narratives that I wanted to establish in this episode, which is kind of developing a mind that can be impenetrable or invulnerable to a lot of these, I like how I described it, turbulences. And one of the most important things is building a strong mind. Often, I guess counterintuitively or intuitively, necessitates, I suppose, some time under stress. Now, do you think that this is always the case? Do we always need to be under pressure? How much pressure do we need to be under, and does it ever end?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm assuming that you're familiar with Angela Duckworth's work.
Yes.
In her book on grit. Yeah. So I'm by no means an expert on grit, but her book is really interesting if you want to find out more about the idea of grit. But specifically for your question about like whether pressure is necessary, personally, I don't think it's necessary, but I think it's a very useful catalyst to growth, right? So like, experience is going to lessen the effects of the pressure. So like over time, you may not need that pressure. and not everybody needs to go through adversity in order to improve. But I think a lot of the research and some of the stuff that is in the Grit book shows that those individuals that experience that adversity and learn how to push through that end up accelerating their growth pretty significantly. And what we know about things like pressure is that it can create some of the helpful anxiety that helps us like drive forward and, you know, focus on the task at hand and maybe increase our motivation. You know, not all anxiety is unhelpful. Some of it actually gets us to like get up and go. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, definitely.
How do you think? So here's we've talked on this show before about the idea of like an optimal stress level, right? Like, and I've defined it, and I don't know, like, tell me if this is ridiculous or not. But in my mind, it's like the midpoint between a panic attack and complete and total apathy. Like right in the middle of that, you have this motivational stress. How in the Smash Bros scene when you're playing a tournament, for instance, you play in a lot of different conditions. You know, sometimes, you know, you might be on the biggest stage in the world. If you go to a major tournament, anybody can enter these tournaments. It isn't like an invitational.
Right.
So, you know, your average Joe might end up on the big stage in front of thousands and thousands of watchers at home and thousands of people live, and they're being judged for the world to see, you know. Or you might be playing in the back of this kind of crusty card shop. There's a dude, his Doritos are spilling into your hair. You're like, man, what's wrong with the situation? How do you consciously enter this, or, you know, exist in this kind of motivational stress state consistently when the circumstances in which you're competing can vary so much?
Man, we could probably spend the whole podcast just on that one question, right? I mean, there's so much to dissect in there. I mean, one, to start off with, like, where is that ideal state of like stress or anxiety? And, you know, your description of like somewhere in the middle, I think it really depends on the performance, right? So you got to figure like if you are being chased by like, you know, a lion or a bear or something, you're going to want as much of that stress to like run as fast as you can, because like you want your big gross muscle movements to be available to you to run, right? But like if you're thinking about you're sitting in a chair and you have a lot of fine muscle movements because you're just, you know, pushing 4 buttons, but you need a lot of focus on the screen to be able to react to a game that's, you know, 60 frames per second. Maybe that's not the same level of anxiety and stress that you want to feel, because that might inhibit those small muscle movements and that fine reaction time, right? So there's definitely like a differentiating point between what is the performance that you have and how much of that like stress and anxiety you want to induce. And then the second layer of that is differentiating between like cognitive anxiety and like somatic or like physical anxiety, right? Because like physical stress, meaning like, you know, you're kind of tired and you're experiencing those physiological symptoms, is very different than experiencing like the perception of stress and fear and anxiety in your mind and what impact that has. And so like both of those would be different levels, I would say, in order to find like that sweet spot for you of like how to perform. But then taking it one step further, right? Like you talked about like, I'm competing like in like a LAN tournament, you know, where it's like a small stage. There's just like a bunch of people in a room versus like I'm on a big stage, like, you know, the tournament that you guys were talking about last weekend that's coming up. You know, and there's, you know, 20,000 people that are watching me. Do you want your zone to be different in those two spots? I don't think so, right? I think you would want to perform how you perform best regardless of the environment. Like your conditions shouldn't dictate what your like in the zone green spot should be. It should be the same whether you're competing in your living room, competing, you know, in a hotel room, or competing on the stage in, you know, in the Oakland Coliseum or something like that, right? So, man,
Right.
so much to talk about just in that one question.
Right. Well. I guess the question there is how do you self-regulate? Like, how do you get to that consistent entry point at the beginning of every tournament set, at the beginning of every online match that you play? How do you ground yourself in a regulatory manner?
Yeah, yeah, and that's like that's where somebody like myself would come in and help, right? So first, you develop that awareness of where is that spot that I perform in my best. Do I need to feel a little bit of anxiety and stress, or do I want to feel calm and relaxed? Once you identify like what that zone is for you, where you play at your best, then you want to have those self-regulation strategies like you're talking about when you know, hey, I'm a little bit too high on that spectrum or I'm a little bit too low and I need to amp myself up. So like from like a physiological, like a body perspective, deep breathing, deliberate breathing, different kind of relaxation strategies, like that's going to help a lot with, the sweaty palms, feeling like you're sick in your stomach, heart starting to race a little bit. Those types of things can be regulated through some breathing strategies. The mental side of it, a lot of that comes down to like your awareness of like the self-talk, like the things that you're saying in your mind. Are you saying things that are productive for you, that are getting you focused on the task at hand? Are you focused on things that you don't have control over? Like, who am I going to get matched up against? Like, what time of the day is it going to be? Am I going to be hungry at that point? Am I going to be thirsty at that point? Like, if I'm in the losers bracket and I've already lost once and it's double elimination, I can't lose again or else I'm going to be out of the tournament. Like those types of thoughts, you could categorize those as productive or counterproductive. And that's either going to help that stress anxiety level that you want to be in, or it's going to make you fall outside of that zone that you want to be in.
Yeah, I love that. I love the being aware of your internal dialogue. I think that's something that I think I've appreciated so much, but I've not been able to to like evoke in words. I think one of the things that goes along with internal dialogue, and that's really important as well to creating this unbreakable mind is setbacks.
Yeah.
I think the internal dialogue during setbacks and during failures is something that a lot of people, especially people who are new to the competitive scene, which are a decent amount of people listening into the podcast, are going to be kind of jarring. Like we want people to have like to be saying like productive things to themselves and to be introspecting about the way that they communicate with themselves and the way that they treat themselves. So how are we going to best prepare for the competitive environment and like how do we develop a good attitude towards inevitable failures?
Yeah. So if you enjoyed Duckworth's Grit book, if you haven't looked at Dweck's work on mindset and like the growth mindset, that would be another one to definitely look into. Because she talks a lot about like perception of setbacks and failure and how those with the growth mindset see setbacks and failure differently than those with what she calls the fixed mindset. And I think like just to sort of summarize, I mean basically it's about learning, right? So like those are all opportunities for you to learn and to improve and opportunities for growth, while still being able to revisit like the things that you did well and the strengths that you have, so that you can sustain them going forward. There's a technique that they use in the military where they have an after action review or an AAR, and they're always identifying 3 sustains and 3 improves, 3 things that you did well that you want to continue to do well, and then 3 areas of improvement, 3 things that you can do better, and then discussing, okay, so how are you going to address those three that you decided on for an improvement? And the trend between those 2 things that I just talked about is that seeing those setbacks, those failures, those mistakes as changeable, as things that through effort and intent, you can improve on them. They are not stable and fixed. They are things that through effort, you would be able to have an influence over, so that the next time you face one of those challenges, you're better off as a result of the adversity that you went through.
Yeah, so I like that whole concept of taking the good with the bad and not really torturing yourself in that process of like, man, I did this wrong, I'm making these mistakes, I suck. Like I know, like when I'm dealing with kids, I've coached a lot of kids in basketball, for instance, over the years, and the technique that I was taught a long time ago, and what stuck with me is like the sandwich technique. Like tell them something good, then,
right.
give them the critique. Like, hey, you didn't, I really liked your effort out there. You didn't make that many shots, we can work on your shooting, but your attitude was awesome. Great job. Kind of the good. So what's up with that? Why do you think humans just inherently don't like to be criticized? Like, do you think that the pursuit of improvement is to go beyond the fear of failure and the feel of being critiqued? Or is it just to accept those limitations and understand, like, hey, I'm not perfect. Like, it's okay if I mess up.
Yeah, I think it's several of those pieces, right? I think part of it is identifying that like setbacks and failures are present if I'm challenging myself. And so like I should be prepared and know that like if I'm putting myself out of my comfort zone because I want to see how good I am, that these types of things are possible. But also like none of this is easy, right? Like that's why the best separate themselves and they're the 0.1%. Because like we can talk about this on like a podcast and we can say like here's the ideal thing to do, but in reality like life happens, right? And like if you make a big mistake and this is like a tournament that has a $25,000 prize pool, and that could change your life, and you just don't show up that day, you lose 3 times in a row and you're out of the tournament after the first round, like you're gonna be upset, like you're gonna be pissed, you're gonna be angry, you're gonna be frustrated, you're gonna be sad, like. And I think that's part of like being a human too. Like we're not robots, right? So I think part of it is like acknowledging, like, okay, I am upset right now, but like over time, whether that's like 10 minutes, 5 minutes a day, however long that takes, like be able to learn from that experience. And we are motivated as individuals through positive outcomes, much more than negative outcomes. But in the same sense, there's still a lot to be learned from those negative outcomes and putting ourselves like in those scenarios to see where we still have in terms of areas of improvement.
That's interesting that you say that we are motivated. Wait, so if I got that right, you said that we were motivated more by positive outcomes than negative outcomes.
Yeah. So like, even if you're having a conversation with somebody and you're trying to have like, come to some sort of a compromise, like people are more likely to agree if you both talk about like a positive end state for both of you rather than like threatening something where like they might do the behavior in order to avoid that threat. But the next time that threat isn't present, you're probably not likely to do that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. So
I thought the only reason that you agreed to come onto the podcast, Steve, was because we threatened you.
How did you get my name?
but yeah, I think that putting into the context of the growth mindset that I love that you brought up. Humans are, I think I've talked about this before, that I think humans are ignorant of growth. I think because growth is usually at a steady progress and is usually at like acceleration of 0 but always going up, we observe massive jumps more than we observe natural progress.
Sure.
And something that I've found is that people are likely to completely quit things based off of really extremely negative outcomes, and seem to be influenced more, not necessarily positively, but seem to be influenced more by the negative outcomes. And how do you suggest that people look at this, and how do you suggest people like observe things from this long-term perspective, that in the end you are going to be like much further than you were when you first started?
Yeah, so I can think of like 2 things off the top of my head. One is acknowledging like what you're talking about in terms of the curve of growth. So like when you're picking up Smash the first time, your ability to like improve from never knowing anything about the game, not knowing any controls or any of the commands, to like being competent enough to be able to like play against the computer at like an easy difficulty level, that growth is going to happen pretty quickly. But then the curve is going to be a lot like steeper as you continue to progress with learning the new activity, and so your rate of improvement is going to decrease significantly, because as you continue to get better at it, the areas that you have for improvement are so much less. And so if you get like, disappointed by that fact, then it's important to just acknowledge that that's part of the process, right?
Right. It's just diminishing returns, right? You just have to be aware of
Right.
it and just accept it as part of the medium. There's no really way around it, right?
Yeah, and I had something else too, but it slipped my mind.
Oh, no worries, man.
It'll come back probably.
Yeah. So one thing that I've always been curious about, and I think we're seeing more of this kind of crossover in between industries. So let's say your background, military, and gaming, and traditional sports. I think a lot have to learn from each other. Traditional sports are very physical in nature. Military training is very physical in nature. Yet people are being, athletes, soldiers are being encouraged to take time to introspect, to work on their mental skills. Are you seeing the inverse of that happening, or do you see any advantages in the inverse of that happening? So, specifically speaking, in the esports world, do you think that esports athletes and just gamers alike have something to gain from a sports psychologist perspective by exercising and by taking care of their bodies?
Oh, absolutely. Like there's no doubt about it. I mean, when you think of like just the impact that sleep has on performance, specifically within like the esports realm, like what makes you a good esport athlete? Like recognizing patterns, visual detection, being able to track, your opponent across the screen, having like very fine muscle movements, maintaining like awareness and focus over extended periods of times while being like sedentary in a chair. Like just thinking about those things and the impact that sleeping for 2 or 3 or 4 hours less than you're supposed to be sleeping every single day, all that stuff is going to deteriorate immediately. So like you could be the best player in the world and have the best strategies and tactics, but if you don't sleep, you're not going to be able to do all that stuff properly. And that applies to the nutrition too. Like if you're all hopped up on like Red Bull and like Sparks and like all these other energy drinks, right? Like if you can't physically control like the caffeine that's going through your body, you might not be able to do as well. In the same sense, like if you're tired and you're lethargic and you haven't had any caffeine and you need that, like what impact that's going to have on your body. If you're just eating like those Cheetos that you were talking about, you don't have like, the good nutrition in your body in order to sustain that engagement over extended periods of time. Like all that stuff is so applicable. Like, yes, it would obviously be applicable to like a professional sports athlete or a soldier, but like for an esport athlete, I totally think that all of those areas of performance would impact an individual, like if they're preparing for a tournament, or if they're just like playing regularly,
Yeah. I think this kind of falls into one of the things about building this unbreakable mind is kind of fueling your mind correctly. And obviously this comes in with the superficial stuff such as diet and exercise, which, as you have contextualized very well, is extremely important. And
definitely.
yeah. And I think there is there is a more nuanced approach to the idea of fueling the mind. And something that I've toyed with and thought about a lot is looking at your friends and influencers as direct contributions to the way that you think, the way that you approach the game, the way that you approach growth, and how you develop as a human and as a competitor. What are your viewpoints on how the people you interact with and the people you learn from, and how what do you think are their effects on your growth, and how can you utilize the people around you to maximize your growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, from my own perspective, it kind of comes down to attitude is contagious, right? So like who you surround yourself with is going to be a part of who you are and how you feel and how you act and how you think. So like if you're surrounding yourself with toxic people that complain about the game or complain about the meta, or give you a hard time because of all the mistakes that you make and only point out all the things that you did wrong, like that's going to have an impact on your perception and your self-appraisal, but also like your enjoyment level too, and your ability to say like, I want to continue to try to improve. Whereas like if you're surrounding yourself with people who like challenge you and encourage you, and are like there to help you towards your goals, and like don't get tilted really quickly and aren't toxic and like play the game the way it's supposed to be played, I think again like you're going to adapt some of those behaviors and that type of thinking, which will only lead to improvement for yourself. And I mean, I'm sure you guys have experienced that, whether it's playing Smash, playing games, or just like in life in general, whether it's your work or when you were back in school.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And to continue on that, we've been asking a lot of questions about how can we use these skills to improve. How can we think about sports psychology to increase our performance, right? And I think it's a natural thing to wonder about as a Smash Bros player, because look, if you're good at Smash, you get glory, you get money, you get women. No, maybe not the last one.
Is that how it works?
No, definitely not the last one. But you're motivated by your success. Smash is kind of a meritocracy in that sense, where the best get the most respect, and so that leads people to say, okay, how can I improve my mindset? How can I think better about this game? But on Beyond the Metagame, we're very much interested in like the peripheral benefits of playing competitive games. So I ask you this, Steve: how can thinking about all of this stuff, from the perspective of improving in a game, actually be applied to your improvement as an all-around individual? How can we kind of take what we learn from gaming and apply that to psychology in general and how it affects our lives in general?
Yeah, it's tough because I don't think we're usually aware that there's so much transferability between one task or one performance or one hat that we wear, one part of our lives, to all of those other areas, right? But like when you think about how dedicated you are to understanding the nuances of like one character in Smash, and like the dedication that you have to understanding like the move set, and how they move around, and what attacks they have, like all of that stuff transfers in terms of like drive and motivation and your types of thinking, what you're passionate about. And I think when it comes to something like the psychology of the game, all the stuff that we've been talking about are all like, trying to help you improve in playing Smash or playing one of the other, games that one of the listeners plays. But a lot of that applies to your life, to your schoolwork, to your jobs, to your work that whatever job it is that you do. And that's like some of the feedback that we often hear is like, I'm helping, if I'm working with a soldier on being resilient and being able to deal with the fact that, they had a poor qualification score on their last M4 qualification, or if I'm helping an individual like be a better leader in his squad or in his company, then he goes home, or she goes home, and he or she starts to adapt and utilize some of those same skills and principles into their interactions with like their spouse or with one of their kids or with their friends when they're out and having a beer. And that, I think, starts to solidify too your ability to be able to like use it as like a multi-tool, use it and adapt the skills that they're learning, from the performance environment into sort of like the life environment, because these are all life skills. Like everything that we're talking about in terms of staying focused, dealing with stress, dealing with anxiety in the context of going to a tournament or playing a game. You're going to deal with stress or anxiety if you're going on a job interview, right? You're going to have to deal with staying focused when you're having a difficult conversation with your wife or with your husband or with one of your kids. And so I think we underestimate the transferability of using this psychology in the context that we've been talking about it over the last half an hour or so in the game to some of the things that we may already be good at in our personal lives and in our professional lives.
Yeah, I think that's so funny because like I was like forced to learn like a new programming language for my job a while ago, and the way that I thought about it was learning like a new Smash character.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah, it was so cool because I actually made the connection, and I found out that the more that I actively tried to look for connections, the better my progress was on transferring that skill. And I think you put it so well. I think that these transferable like qualities, these multi tools are so valuable to us because they're there, like they exist in our mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even
yeah.
it's like visualization or using imagery, and like, you know, you're practicing, like you said, like learning a new character. Like you can take that same idea of like coming up with an image and manipulating it in my mind and doing like mental reps and mental rehearsals. And you can just take that like anywhere with any of the other tasks that you have, whether it's for your job or whether you're still in school and those types of things. I think it's so cool.
Right. And I think the one thing that you talked about, that you touched on, that I'm really interested in is being a leader. Now, one of the things about Smash is that often the leaders, like Peon said, are the best of the game. There is this inherent meritocracy. If you are better at the game, you are going to be perceived as someone who's more valuable to look for coaching or for advice. When in reality, there's so much that people have to offer, even if they aren't necessarily the best players in their scene. What do you recommend for people to be like, for people to grow into in these like micro leaders? Like, how do you encourage people to be more open about becoming leaders in environments where they wouldn't necessarily be seen as one?
Yeah, I think there's a challenge there because sometimes we just assume that like the people that are the best at what they do are like the people that we should look up to, or maybe they're like good leaders. And in reality, like they might be really toxic individuals and they might not be good coaches, and they just happen to have like a very good skill set. So like, I think you need to sort of be careful with that sometimes, because you might not know the person, you know, on a personal level. You might just be able to see them perform, you know, at a high level in like the, you know, the competitions that you're watching. But yeah, to when you get past that assumption and you say like, no, this, you know, I do want to improve in my leadership style and to be like a good, you know, influencer. I think there's a few things that I've seen from my career field, you know, the 6 or so years that I've been in the military, and then prior to that working with the athletes in the sporting environment. One of those is authenticity. So like not trying to necessarily be something or someone that you aren't. You know, those that are followers of leaders tend to appreciate authenticity above all else. And they're usually, people are pretty good with their social intelligence to be able to say like, this person's faking it. This person's not genuine, and they don't have my interests like in mind. So I think that authenticity piece is probably one of the biggest like pieces that I would focus on if I was developing as a leader. And I think a lot of people also appreciate like flexibility, but also leading by example. So you don't necessarily have to do everything that you ask of someone else, but in the same sense, like people really appreciate those that are willing to, you know, challenge themselves in the same way that you're asking those that are following you to challenge themselves, and maintaining flexibility in terms of, you know, something that we talked about previously, like growth. Like understanding that not all goals that you set for yourself are going to be achieved the first time. And that's why you need to be adaptable. You need to maybe change your goals or flex them, but you still want to maintain challenging goals that are for yourself. So, I mean, you know, we can talk about leadership a lot, but I think authenticity, I think, you know, that leadership by example, and maybe some flexibility in terms of like what you ask of others, and maybe also like how you communicate would probably be areas that I would focus on.
Awesome. So, Steve, we've so far talked. I mean, even right there, I loved how you addressed, you and AV addressed the kind of peripheral aspects of Smash. You know, like becoming a leader. You know, being able to utilize your leadership skills to benefit others. That is a huge part of the scene. But I wanna curate this next bit of the conversation to the average Joe, to the guy who's just in. You know, he's got the sticks in his hand. He's playing Smash. Maybe he's going to his, some of his first tournaments, or maybe he's an average tournament competitor.
Right.
What is the sports psychologist's toolbox that that person can incorporate into their play, and how do they go about starting the process of practicing these sports psychology tools?
So like step one of being like mentally tough. Is that what you're asking?
Sure. If that's how you define it. I mean, like, what tools are at their disposal?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially, like, developing self-awareness is probably where I would start. Like, if it was somebody that was like, look, I haven't done anything to work on my mental game yet, I don't really know where to start, I would say, like, focusing on self-awareness, and like one of the best tools that you can do to start developing some of that self-awareness is like journaling, or like creating like a training log or a logbook, like really however you want to, whatever name you want to call it, but just like writing down every time that you play, like what are some of the things that are my strengths, like what, like if I'm pinned against the wall, and I have to like reach deep, like what are the things that I do really well, and just for that particular for that night or that day that you were playing, what are some things that I want to improve on, what are some of the thoughts that I was having in my head that were either productive or counterproductive to me playing at my best. Maybe you identify like that energy level that we talked about, like what are how do I play at my best today? I was feeling really tired, and so like I didn't play all that well, but yesterday when I was feeling like calm and relaxed, I did play really well. So maybe it's somewhere in between like tired and calm that I'm good, but if I'm like too anxious, I don't play good. And like the more information you can collect over the course of like maybe like 30 days of just like writing down your play sessions, then you can start targeting some of those self-regulation strategies that we started to layer in some of this conversation as well. But it's really hard to target self-regulation strategies without knowing what you already do well and what areas you need for improvement when it comes to the mental game. And like, Abhi was talking about earlier, like how hard it is to just tune into your thoughts and know like what kind of thoughts I'm having. So like it could be just starting there, like writing down some of the thoughts that I had during the hour that I was playing and becoming more aware of the types of thoughts that you have during a playing performance.
Yeah, I think that's really cool that you mentioned that, because so I used to do a lot of yoga, and I still practice meditation a lot, and one of the most important things is not just breathing, but just noticing the breath. Like the moment you notice it, you're like the way that your body starts breathing is completely different from your standard unconscious breath. And the like I like bringing that analogy to what you said about thoughts, and saying like, am I conscious of all of these thoughts? Am I writing them down? Am I noticing all of these things that I say to myself? And I think that's super cool, and I think that that level of self-awareness, I think, is a really cool place to start.
Yeah, I mean, if you identified, if that was all you did and just wrote down like some of the thoughts that you were having during your playing time, and you realized that a lot of thoughts that you were having were like, this guy's a scrub, like, he just used the same move over and over again, like he's using like such a noob character, like, and a lot of the attributions to maybe why you had a bad play session was because you were blaming somebody else, and these are the thoughts that you were having. Like you could adjust that, right? And then you can start to work on like, well, what was my contribution to the problem? Like, what were the things that I was doing that could have countered this individual with that move that he was using against me, that special that he was using against me, that character that he was using against me, or maybe the types of thoughts that you're having were like really self-defeating thoughts, and you're like, man, you're stupid, like I can't believe you made that mistake. And these are the types of thoughts that you're having, and you're wondering like why at the end of the play session you feel like an hour's worth of enjoyment didn't happen, and you're just like pissed off at yourself. And so then you can start to work on those types of thoughts, and the meditation, the mindfulness of just being aware of those things could be a huge catalyst for growth, if you're just trying to improve, whether you're like the beginner level or really any level.
Yeah, I love how you talk about the whole concept of being conscious about what thoughts you're having. I know when I compete in Smash, but also in other video games or sports even, when I do best, I'm in kind of that state. I think people refer to it usually as like the zone, where you're just
Hmm.
locked in, and I actually don't have any sort of stream of consciousness happening. It's just me in the game, kind of complete. There's a complete marriage between me and whatever I'm controlling. Is there a way that sports psychologists define like how to unlock the zone or how to get into the zone? And when you aren't in the zone and you're having a stream of consciousness, what positive thoughts can you tell yourself to help yourself get into the zone?
Yeah, the zone and like that state of flow that you're talking about. There's a lot of research on it. I don't know how to say the individual's name, and I'm gonna butcher it, but it's like Mihaly, like Chet's Mihaly or something like that. But who like her she did a lot. I think it's a she. She did a lot of research on flow states, and I'll say like from my perspective, I usually don't try to coach people to get into that flow state or that zone, only because it can be really fleeting, and most people tend to perform not in that state. So like even when you were talking about it, you're like, yeah, it happens sometimes. It's pretty irregular. So like usually the strategies from like a sports psychology standpoint that I would work on with like an esport athlete or a soldier or a regular athlete, like I would work on when you're not in that like unconscious state where everything is working for you. You have no thoughts. Like it seems like your actions are happening before you even like want them to happen. I would probably focus more on the other 95% of the time that you're playing. Like what can you do to still try to perform at as high of a level as possible, whether it's having a pre-performance routine before you start playing or in between matches, whether it's like some arousal control strategies of like amping up or bringing yourself down, like the breathing strategy that we initially talked about, like those types of things I would probably focus on more than trying to like trigger yourself to be in that flow state, if that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that, and I think what is like Michael Jordan said, make your weaknesses your strengths. So kind of improving you at your worst level. If you can increase that, then I'm sure you'll develop a sort of consistency that's great to be able to depend on.
Yeah, like definitely, like we as humans tend to focus on those areas for improvement, those weaknesses that we have. Like we're usually pretty good at identifying things that we need to get better at. But I think retraining your mind also to be able to acknowledge the things that you do well, the strengths that you have, those things that you can rely on that are a part of who you are, is also really just as important. I think that that's something that often gets overlooked. Like if you ask somebody, tell me 5 areas that you need to improve on in Smash, they'd probably be able to say that very easily. If you said like, hey, tell me 5 things that you're already good at, just off the top of their head, it may be more difficult for them to answer that question, because we tend to focus on the things that we need to improve on, the things that we're not good at. Especially as like leaders and coaches, that's usually where we're focusing our time, is what can this individual or I do to get better, as opposed to reinforcing some of the strengths that we already possess so that they sustain that behavior or that effort or those types of thoughts.
So let's say me, for instance. I mean, a lot of the times in tournament, for instance, I'm very good just naturally at getting into that flow state. I don't know if I'm a ginger. That's just like a side effect of being a ginger, or if my parents just
Maybe.
had like, yeah. I mean, hey, who knows? We'll have to write a book on that. Or if I just kind of got lucky in that way. I don't know. I'm usually really good about kind of getting into that state. But there are times where I'm just so distracted, and there'll be a lot of people in the crowd, in the arenas, and cheering at you, saying your name. Maybe you're at a small tournament, and there's some friends are watching their boy play against you, and they're cheering him on, and you kind of have these little earworms bugging at you and kind of pulling you away
Yeah.
from your own inner thoughts. How when I can't get into the flow state, what kind of thoughts does a high performer have in those circumstances?
So are you asking like what types of thoughts do you have when you're in a flow state?
when I fail to get into the flow state, but
Oh,
I
okay.
still need to maintain some sort of concentration or positivity.
Yeah, so I mean, if I was you in that scenario, prior to going into the tournament or the competition, I try to identify like 2 or 3 specific distractions that I can anticipate or expect. Potentially those that in the past have thrown me off of my game. So, like if you said like the crowd cheering for my opponent is one of the things that usually gets me distracted. Like I would write that down. If one of them is like I get rushed onto the stage and like I didn't have a lot of time to prepare, maybe that's a distraction for me. I would write that down, and I would write down like 2 or 3 of the things that get you distracted and cause you to lose focus. And then the flip side of that would be, what are the 2 or 3 things that I need to focus on when I'm competing in that particular environment? So maybe it's like the comfort that I have sitting in the chair and like my positioning from like the screen to where I'm sitting. Maybe it's like warming up my hands so that my hands aren't cold and I'm more likely to be able to push the buttons as quickly and accurately as I can. And so just like identifying those things that or you think are going to distract you, and that way you're aware prior to going into the tournament, to the competition, of those things. And then having a refocusing strategy of when I notice that I'm starting to listen to the fans, okay, now I need to go back to those 2 or 3 things that I listed that I need to focus on in order to play my game efficiently.
Yeah, it's really funny because there's some competitors that are very notorious for having this checklist. One of them I think we've talked about on this show is a player called Wizrobe. He is a Super Smash Brothers Melee player, and he has everything in his setup routine down to a T. He wears the same like type of blend in the shirt, like the same shirt in every single high stakes situation. He has like the distance to the like you said, the distance to
I just
the
imagine
monitor
his,
set.
his wife's water breaking. He's like, "Oh, honey, let me go grab my special shirt. This is going to be intense."
But yeah, he has optimized, maybe to a fault. He has optimized the this process, and I think that there is sort of a barrier to this process in the sense that people that like people are like for some reason view this as overkill.
Yeah.
Why like yeah, why do like how do we get out of this mindset of thinking that anything is overkill or too try hard, and where do we draw the line, I suppose, between over preparation and under preparation?
Well, I think first you need to differentiate between like superstition and like routines that are actually helpful for you, right? So like wearing the same shirt pattern, that's more like superstition. Like that's not actually going to help you like react quicker to your opponent's moves, right? But doing something like your screen positioning of how far away you are from the screen, that might actually be able to help you. And so like identifying like what is superstitious and what is actually helping you with the performance is probably where I would first start with that process. But there is a lot of benefit to having like a comfort level. So like doing the 3 to 4 to 5 steps before you actually engage in the activity bring confidence, bring comfort. Like Peon was saying, like setting you up to try to get into that flow state. Like there are actual benefits to doing some of those behaviors. Some of the ones that are like silly, like you said, like what color shirt you're wearing, maybe not as much, but there are tangible benefits to feeling more confident, feeling more in control of your environment, feeling more comfortable. But I would say like if you're like pre-performance routine is like 26 steps and it takes you like 20 minutes in order to go through all those things, that's probably not helpful, right? Because if you're in a tournament, they're not going to be able to stop the tournament for you to be able to get through your checklist. So like also knowing that it should be relatively short. And I also need to like have some adaptability where like if I don't have the time to go through the 10 things that I want to do, here's like the 2 things that I feel like I have to do in order to set myself up for success.
Yeah,
Right.
I love that. Did you have follow up, baby?
No, I just wanted to be fair to Wizrobe and say it's not the color of his shirt, but he actually, if he doesn't have the same texture of shirt, he will notice during the game, and
Okay.
it will throw off his play. So to be fair to him, he does have these these necessities, but yes, in fact, it's actually kind of notorious because he has held up like lots of sets. He has like a 15-minute or 20-minute ritual before every set. But yeah, not to like
no
discredit him or
disrespect
anything.
to Wizard.
Yeah, no disrespect.
Like
Absolutely, no disrespect.
Steve,
but yes,
were you throwing some shade? I think you would.
No, not at all. Heard people that are like, change my socks or like wash them or anything because like I wanted these socks and they're like 6 months old and like, you know, these tournaments, man, like people need to be wearing deodorant, people need to be using hand sanitizer, like there's some funky smells already, so like if you got a lucky pair of socks that you're not washing, like that's not helping anybody, let alone like helping you.
No, Steven, okay, here's the thing. Super Bowl is in a week. A few days really at the time of recording. Tom Brady comes into your office and says, "Look, Steve, I've won more Super Bowls than just about anybody, and I've been wearing this pair of underwear since the first game. Never taken them off since." Can you really be like, nah, dude? Like at that point, like, does he kind of have a point?
Well, I mean, I'm a very accomplished sports psychologist, obviously world renowned, of course. So Tom Brady should obviously be taking his advice from. No. I'd probably say, hey man, you do you. Like you're the GOAT. Like you're the greatest quarterback that plays this game right now. Like if you like that underwear and Giselle likes you wearing that underwear, man, you wear that underwear. You do you. Like I don't think I would tell him to change that. Now,
That's
if
true.
he was looking for like, what's the reason why I perform well in this underwear? Then maybe I would talk about like, hey man, you feel comfortable. Like that's something that you have control over. Like if you're going to the Super Bowl, you don't have control over, whether the fans boo you or cheer you. You don't have control over like the weather outside or what the traffic's going to be like getting to the stadium that day. But you have control over what pair of underwear you're going to wear. Nobody can change the pair of underwear that you're wearing that day. So like if that gives you comfort and it makes you feel better, then that probably is the reason why you perform well wearing that particular, underwear.
I love that. That's actually an awesome answer to that. Steve, we're running out of time, so I'll ask you one more question.
Okay. Hit me.
If you had, so in let's say regular fitness training, you'll have a kind of a regimen, a routine. You'll go see a physical trainer, and he'll be like, "Okay, man, I won't see you in a week, but in the meantime, here's a little something that you should work towards, that you should think about in your upcoming workouts." What would you challenge our community of gamers, of competitors, to think about in their upcoming sets and practice sessions? What should they be mindful of in the future?
Well, I'll give you an answer because I want to make sure that I give you an answer. Okay, but here's the caveat to that.
Okay,
I think it's going to be different for every person. So like people that have been playing Smash for years now, people that are just picking up the game for the first time, even those individuals, they might have different strengths and weaknesses. So like to say that there's like one global thing that can help everybody, it may make more sense for individuals to have different things that they're working on or different things that they're focusing on. All that being said, I would say that like goal setting is pretty universal. So the ability for you to set a specific challenging but realistic goal within some sort of like time frame is something that pretty much at every level that would help somebody. And so like saying like I want to be competent with this character in 2 weeks from now, and defining like what competence means within the realm of Smash. Like I think specific goals that you set for yourself will always increase motivation, increase the focus that you have on the game, maximize your training so that it's as deliberate as possible. You're getting the most out of it. It'll help you build confidence by seeing progression. It'll, all the benefits of goal setting are present regardless of your level of competence. So I would say if there's one thing that you guys can start to do today, to set a challenging but realistic goal that's specific, something that you can measure pretty easily for yourselves, and start to see that improvement over the course of time through your training.
Yeah, I mean, not to for us to dive back into another pool of conversation, but I liked what you said about it being like personal to each individual, in the sense that I think everyone should, even although everyone doesn't have the capital to have their own sports psychologist, I think everyone has the friends to be their own sports psychologist. So yeah. I actually think that goal setting with friends and figuring out stuff with other people and doing that personal exploration with someone else, like I think me and Peon have done with each other, is something that's really cool too. It's like, I feel like because it's super personal, there's a lot to be explored with another individual.
Yeah, that knowledge is power. I mean, not to circle too far back, but you guys talked about like, who are you surrounding yourself with? Like, those individuals, are they going to encourage you towards your goals? Are they going to remind you when you start to fall off on your goal? Are they going to give you feedback on ways to improve towards your goals? Like the relationship that you guys have with each other and some of the conversations that you have on some of the previous episodes.
Steve, thank you so much for joining us, man. I should tell you, you've earned your way onto the BTM Hall of Fame, okay?
Yeah, that's what I was... Couldn't wait to hear that.
This is what you came here for. Look, I'm telling you,
That's
societies
right.
will fall. Generations will collapse, but one thing will remain. Your name will be etched in the wall of greatness, man. Thank you.
Right. Tom Brady can't say that no matter what. Right?
and you can change your underwear too, Steve. That's the best part.
That's my plan.
Steve, honestly, man, it was such a privilege to talk to you. It was so fun. You're not only a very insightful guy, but you're just a fun dude to chat with. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, this has been a blast, guys. Like, seriously, I appreciate you guys reaching out. And I don't have as much experience in the Smash scene. I do appreciate like the challenge of fighting games, and I love watching like the big tournaments like Evo and Capcom Cup and stuff. So I hope that some of the stuff that we talked about today can help your listeners. And I think, you guys have a really great listener base. I mean, every episode that I listen to, you guys are talking about like the different countries of people that are listening to you and how it's worldwide. And Smash is a very cool community. So I appreciate you guys bringing me on here. And if anybody has additional questions, or if you guys have additional questions, let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Guys, go. I'm challenging you all to go thank Steve personally. And show him some love, show him some appreciation for coming on the show today. Steve, where can people find you, my friend?
The best place right now, it's on my Twitter profile. To hit me up on Twitter at Sports Psych NYLI. I'm working on some branding things still, but that's the best place to get to me. Sports Psych NYLI. I'm usually pretty active in terms of if somebody shoots me like a mention or a tweet or a DM, I'll get back to you pretty quickly as soon as I can.
All right, Steve. Thank you very much, man.
All right, thank you guys.
Yo, Abhi, what if like this week during our interview with sports psychologist Steve, we do like a Freaky Friday situation?
Sure, so I'll be you and you'll be me.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that case, I get to do the intro for this episode. So welcome to Beyond the Metagame. This week live from Michelle Obama's studio apartment.
And I'm AV. I am sitting on the apartment couch introspecting.
Yeah, and for all you military folk, it's all Charlie Echo.
I say more things than that.
Dude, that's all you say.
Welcome back to Beyond the Metagame. Right now, it's just AV and I, and we just got done with our interview with Sports Psychologist Steve. What a man. I love that guy. Is that weird? I love him.
Honestly, I love him too. I cannot disagree with that statement.
There are certain people in this world that they just got it. You know what I mean? They got that certain X factor. Didn't Simon Cowell have a show called X Factor?
That is correct.
Well, yeah. Just like that talent scouting show, Sports Psychologist Steve's got the X Factor. And I'm really, really grateful to have him on, man. How are you feeling after the interview?
I think we did a really good job of like developing like a bunch of different narratives with him, and I think there was just so much to take away from that episode. It might be a little overwhelming. I mean, not to say that someone would need to go and re-listen to this episode like 3 times, even though I might. But
yeah, I want to like, because even though we talked about it, I want to hear every word. I want to pick as much from that guy's brain as possible. We're definitely gonna have to have him back on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this whole idea of training your mind and finding a way to just start awareness, like we've talked about it, I've said this countless times, introspection, but the thing is he put a flavor on it and context to it that was pristine. That was perfect. I love the way that he brought into reality this way to connect with yourself and to understand what is this internal dialogue, how can I be aware of it, what is it telling me, and how do I improve by noticing it?
Yeah, AV, for some reason when he says all those things, I believe him. When you say it, I feel like you're just trying to trick me.
I don't blame you. I do have something up my sleeve, and anything to get the upper hand for when we play this weekend for the first time in person.
I totally, when I think of you, AV, I think of you as this like Machiavellian type of malevolent figure. Is that weird? Am I alone in this, listeners?
Yeah, I think you're projecting, and I think inevitably a lot of the listeners are going to get that view, and I'm going to hate you.
All right, man. Well, right now it's time for our questions. First up this week from our boy or girl, Pelapingo. Pelapingo asks, how do you work with expanding old combo strings or finding new ones? Both true combos and enemy DI-based combos, especially in a new and unexplored game like Ultimate. I mean, right now we just saw Piranha Plant be released, so, you know, we're seeing a lot of people do this process with Piranha Plant.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question in the sense that there might be multiple paths down this, as with most things. But my path personally would be first to watch as many pro players of my character as possible. I want to see as many different ways that other people are experimenting with the character, because just by like raw volume, you can basically ingest a bunch of different playstyles way quicker by watching people than by either playing yourself or playing other people of your character. So that's one thing to look at. In terms of discovery, I kind of just, if something works once and it works really well, I'll explore it. But outside of that, I personally am not someone who would take DK to the training room and start experimenting with a bunch of different combo starters. But I don't think that's a bad thing, and I want to send this back over to Peon to see if maybe that is something that you've done in this game.
Yeah, I do a lot of labbing. I'm a lab fiend, kind of. I love to try to figure out new combos and stuff, and a lot of it is just handing a controller over to my buddy as well. Like if I'm practicing with a real life partner, and say, "Hey, DI this out. Let me see if this is true," and just kind of fiddling around. So I would say, pick whatever character you want to practice the combo against. Drag like your friend or family member, your significant other into the training. Just say, "Hey, look, I'll bake you a cake, but just give me 10 minutes of your time." And have them do different DIs, have them mash, air dodge, or jump out of your combos, and just see if they're true. And a lot of it, like I have these kind of revelations at times. I'll be at my desk at work, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if I'm gonna try that when I go home. So it's just a lot of experimentation, and like AB said, looking at top players and trying to steal stuff from them as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny. It's like the best chess players play chess in their mind. I feel like there's like a small crossover about like Smash players like playing Smash in their mind, which is really funny. Yeah. So let's move on to the next question. So we have Silver, who asks, I do have a quick question in regards to matchups. Matchups are something that are brought up a lot during the show, but how can I tell what is a good or bad matchup for my character? Personally, I mean Roy. So, can you give some context on that?
Yeah. So I've infamously said that I get pissed off when people say, "Yo, matchups just don't really matter unless you're at the top level." I hear people say that all the time, even like mid-level players, even like tournament veterans. I'm like, what? In what universe is that true? So let me break down my theory of matchups just real briefly. Matchups are only important if you understand what strengths your character has and how they interact with the weaknesses and strengths of the character that you're fighting against. So let's say you're fighting against Captain Falcon, for simplicity's sake, who notoriously is a bad recovery. Your character, it's a good sign you have a good matchup against this character if your character is awesome at edge guarding, right? And let's say you never, ever edge guard the Falcon once. Well, you're not really utilizing the benefits you have in the matchup. So at that point, is it really positive or negative? So the argument is that matchups don't matter at any level. Well, even low-level players can learn how to edgeguard a Captain Falcon. So that's an oversimplification, but the point is, find out what strengths and weaknesses your character has. Find out what strengths and weaknesses your opponent's character has, and think about how they coexist. You know, let's say you're playing as Captain Falcon. You have a bad recovery, but you're awesome at edgeguarding. Well, let's say you're fighting against a character that has amazing edgeguarding and an amazing recovery that can't really be edgeguarded well. Well, suddenly, your weakness has been exposed and your strength has been negated. That's a bad sign. So, look for examples like I've outlined there.
Yeah, I think that it's something that is explored very personally. I think one thing that is really important to understand is that sometimes you can beat one player of a character and then lose really hard to another player of that same character. So, one thing that is really important is understanding what specific tools of a character are you losing to? What specific play styles are you losing to? And that is usually what better informs your direct first path forward in figuring out a matchup.
Awesome. So JMF Super Smash asks, I'm really bad when the opponent is good at applying pressure. I pick bad options and have a hard time reversing the situation. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on how to practice in this area, and if there are specific things that they should be dealing with or thinking about when faced with pressure?
So this is a interesting question in the sense that there's lots of different types of pressure. The most common one is usually very linear. People that play aggressively and that play aggressively linear are usually using the same options over and over again. Obviously, there's characters like Meta Knight, which no matter what, Meta Knight's going to use dash attack and dash grab. Calling a Meta Knight player linearly aggressive in that context would be incorrect, and that's just their options. But picking out certain options that people use over and over again and understanding how people are getting in, especially when they get in, taking note of that and saying, this is how they got in, like this percentage of the time. It doesn't have to be exact, obviously. You're not a robot, but just see what you're getting hit by most of the time. And then there's usually a very straightforward counter to it. If you're getting dash attacked a lot, you shield or you spot dodge the dash attack if it doesn't have a lingering hitbox. If you literally just break it down in these friendly environments, it's usually a good way to start figuring out how to combat these aggressive players. But obviously, I think there's a whole nother realm to it, which I think I want you, Peon, to get into, in the sense of how do you how do you think well in situations where you're just getting overwhelmed?
Yeah, I think it mostly comes down to experience. You know, playing against people with that like find a let's say you're playing against someone online, or you find someone either in the BTM Discord or elsewhere, or a real life training partner, and play against that rush down speed as often as you can. Eventually, you'll get used to the pace. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's like you run with a weight vest on long enough. Eventually, you won't even notice that the weight vest is on. So that's kind of one approach I would take to it, but it's mostly, you know, I think it's a confidence thing. I think rushdown characters are inherently scary because they are inherently overwhelming. But if you know what options to choose, how to punish certain characters, if you're good at the specific matchups, just by playing them a lot and by understanding them, suddenly the speed won't really be as much of a factor. It'll just be a byproduct of something that you understand more holistically. Does that make sense, Ivy?
Yeah, that's really cool. I think that's exactly what I was looking for.
Cool. But guys, this concludes maybe my favorite episode of BTM yet. It was a lot of fun to record. Again, super shout outs to our homie Sports Psych Steve. That guy is just incredible. Like I said before, give him a follow. Find out to him. Reach out to him. Say, man, that was awesome having you on the show. If you liked the episode, please let us know at our Twitter. It's at Beyond Metagame. That is Beyond Metagame. Twitter left no room for the. And you can find me at Peon_GCE. That's Golf Charlie Echo for all of you military folk. AV, where can people find you, my friend?
People can find me at A plus my long Indian last name on Twitter.
Woo! Okay, and guys, remember, join our Discord. You'll find it in the show notes. You'll find it on our YouTube description, or in our YouTube description, I guess. I don't know what the correct preposition is there. And, guys, this is a new request. Please give us a review on iTunes, whatever podcast app you're listening to. I don't really know if it does anything. I hear other podcasts say, oh, it helps us get discovered. Not even sure if that's necessarily true, but hey, might as well give it a go, and we'd also love to see your feedback as well, I'm sure. Guys, that is all for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.